Yeah, so so let's talk about the Boros Convoke deck, because that received some new tools with the release of Murders of Karlov Manor, more notably the second best card in Magic the Gathering in Novice Inspector.
Yeah, Novice Inspector, basically a functional reprint of Thraben Inspector, and that has given this deck so many copies of that effect, and it really allows the deck to, you know, lean its mana curve down and just have so much redundancy for things like Lethal Demolition and Ward in the Inner Sky.
Yeah. So it looks like we're kicking things off here with a Cavern of Souls. I'm going to assume it's going to name humans, and we have a Herald of the Pantheon here. And this is another reason why Boros Convoke is just so explosive. You can just play so many threats and play this Warden of the Inner Sky, which is a new innovation from the Lost Caverns of Ixalan. Mason, what has Warden of the Inner Sky done for Boros Convoke?
It's given it another Convoke, air quote, payoff, and just allows the deck to have a lot of, you know, consistency. Those extra scries really add up, and turning your creature into a huge flyer that has vigilance makes it hard for your opponent to attack back and just really smooths your draw out. So James here basically playing Orzhov Humans. This is a card where Zoe's really going to lean on this Warden because it's going to pressure James, put him on the back foot, and allow her to kind of sculpt her draw while pressuring him. And, you know, we're seeing why this is one of the best decks, is Zoe just convokes out the night.
I love Sideways Typal. It's my favorite kind of deck.
Yeah, and this is actually, you know, the only thing that isn't really in the standard deck here is these extra copies of Thraben Inspectors and Ornithopters. This is actually a deck you might see a lot of tomorrow, so get ready for it. And it is a very, very good deck in Pioneer. It has some awkward matchups against decks like Amalia, but like we saw from Misplaced Ginger, you know, Amalia does have a tough time versus the pseudo other best decks in the format. So if you're someone like Zoe, you're pretty happy to play against those decks like Phoenix, like Rakdos. So, you know, she's kind of eating people up right now at 2-0.
Yeah, and one thing that's worth noting in this match is that James is not drawing any lands. He had the Cavern of Souls turn 1, but hasn't been able to draw in anything since. So he is on the back foot here, coupled with Zoe's just explosive start, just from playing all these cheap threats and convoking into a Knight Errant of Eos.
Yeah, and you're seeing sort of like game object typal is what Zoe's playing, with just like so many things on the board, and we're gonna get this kind of magic. Yeah, it's really fun, and it gives you actually weirdly a lot of agency in your like aggressive creature deck. Like historically, these kind of decks do not have a lot of control over their draw step or ability to like play as the game goes long. But with things like Blood and Clues, you're actually able to keep playing even when, you know, you just kind of flood on lands a little bit. Not perfectly, but those kind of things really add up and allow for decks like this to actually turn into main players in the format.
Yeah. You know it's good when you're playing Convoke when you can get a Venerated Loxodon off a Knight Errant of Eos. And that was a very quick game one from Zoe. And it just proves like how explosive Convoke is.
Yeah, this deck, I mean, it's hard, like not much happened, you know, from the side of like what we got to say, but so much happened in the game and shows kind of like why Convoke is the best creature aggressive deck in the format, and kind of puts all the other creature decks in a format where they have to have something for this matchup or be playing on some different angle.
For sure. So let's get into sideboarding. So as the Orzhov Humans player, what do you look to bring in against this go wide aggressive Boros Convoke deck?
You know, James doesn't have that much that's actually super good in this matchup. It might be a spot where maybe I could see James doing something like bringing in Invasion of Gobekon just to try and break up the high synergy cards out of Zoe's deck, right? That's a card traditionally you want against Wrath effects, but honestly, like, you know, maybe Thoughtseize like as a one-mana version of that. The thing I like about Invasion is the backside will grow your team and give you indestructible. But honestly, I think James is just a little outmatched and is seemingly built in such a way that he doesn't really try to win this matchup. You know, we don't even have anything like Brave the Elements that used to be a big mirror breaker anymore. Obviously, Zoe's deck does have some amount of mixed colors, so that makes it a little bit harder too. But, you know, we just have not a lot of cards that are good in this kind of matchup. James is really looking to play against Phoenix and Rakdos as well, and probably avoid players like Zoe.
Yeah. And going to Zoe's sideboard, what would you look to side in just to slot this victory against Orzhov Humans?
Honestly, I wonder if
Zoe's much.
Yeah, she has Giant Killer and Rending Volley. So, you know, Zoe didn't get to see very much from James's deck there. So it could be a situation where Zoe is just like, hey, I'm going to present a very similar deck with these Rending Volleys in. But I think those cards are typically more for things like Amalia or Greasefang. So if Zoe, wants to play around cards like Brutal Cathar or Adeline, that could be a good addition. But for the most part, I would honestly not be surprised if Zoe just goes like, shrug, I'll present the same deck and, pass to you or whatever.
One thing that's really interesting about Zoe's deck is the omission of Thalia, Guardian of Thraben. That has been such a role player in these Boros Convoke decks recently, just because it helps against like the Is It Phoenix decks, and just having that inbuilt, I'm going to tax you for playing all these ops and sleight of hands.
Yeah, that is going to really hurt in that matchup. And against blue-white control, getting that one extra turn against temporary lockdown, against, more expensive cards like Supreme Verdict, those add up. And every additional mana, it's hard to explain, but basically once you get to like 4 mana on cards, it's often worth more than just 1 turn because it becomes so much harder to get there. As we're going to come back to the boost, so you can look at my face while I talk about this. But, much smoother on the eyes. But, the Thalia really does add up. But one thing I like about Zoe's deck list, if you look at it, is she actually built her sideboard in a way with a bunch of non-creatures. And so I wonder if this was a thing where she's like, hey, traditionally I can't play a lot of these cards because Thalia is awkward with them, right? It taxes me as well. So she is doing a good job of saying like, hey, my deck is a bit more unique than the average Convoke deck, but I'm building with that in mind. And it's exciting to see, and it seems to be working out for her. Absolutely.
One thing I just love about this Boros Convoke deck is how clean it is deck building wise. It's pretty much 4 ofs outside of Imodane's Recruiter in terms of like non-land spells. And there's just something really nice, aesthetically pleasing just to have a bunch of 4 ofs as an aggro deck.
Yeah, just a bunch of those. And Zoe also, one thing I really like about her deck as well is she's much cheaper now that like Thalia, but is still actually playing more lands than the average Convoke deck is, just by 1. But it's a card like Den of the Bugbear that, rewards her for having those extra lands, which is really nice. And, the thing about these decks, right, and this is something that, you can probably attest to a lot, is when you're playing them, you actually want to have like 2 or 3 lands because you want to be double spelling every turn. You don't want to be stuck on 1 land only doing 1 thing.
Yeah, you don't want to be, as much as you want to lean on like convoking your threats out, sometimes you just need the lands to just help you get there and stabilize on the board. So that extra land is a really nice call from Zoe. And I believe we're still deliberating mulligans. Looks like Zoe's going to keep their 6, and James kicks things off for the Kytheon hero of Akros.
Yep. Zoe, a very deliberate player. One thing I really like and respect about her is she thinks through her whole turn typically and then executes. That is kind of why we saw her, in our Players Championship in 2022, and really shines at learning a deck and then playing it incredibly well and technically precise. And you see her kind of, when she was thinking about the mulligan, she was kind of thinking about like, what are my next 2 or 3 turns going to look like, and kind of lining them up in her head. And that gives you a lot of edge.
For sure. So James kicked things off with a Herald of the Pantheon and a Hopeful Initiate, which is proven to be a really good like humans card. Just being able just to slam counters on things and just remove them to deal with, tricky permanents is something that comes up quite a bit in Pioneer.
Yeah, it's weird just how like, kind of mild utility comes up and just, often turns into a 2/3 pretty quickly, which is just pretty good.
Okay, then. So we are back on Zoe's turn. Looking to kick things off with another Novice Inspector, because if there's one thing you can't have enough of, is enough Novice and Thraben Inspectors.
It's true.
Looks like Zoe's just going to get aggressive. He might as well just chip in for like a point or 2 of damage here. And this Mutavault looks like it's going to take care of the heroic reinforcements. And we'll go back to James's turn.
Yeah,
so it looks like James is drawing into a lot of lands. It's not something that you kind of want as the aggressive player.
Yeah, and this is something where Zoe's deck having Ward on the Inner Sky and things like Thraben Inspector, like Voldaren Epicure, like Novice Inspector, sort of let her have uses for her mana and be in a really good position beforehand.
It looks like we did sideboard in some Rending Volleys just to deal with that Hopeful Initiate. Rending Body is just such a nice card to have in these Convoke sideboards. It answers a surprising amount of threats within the Pioneer metagame.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does a really good job of just covering a lot of space. And for a single mana, it's so hard for it to go wrong, too.
And speaking of a card with a single mana, that's also quite good. Gleeful Demolition hits the board, and now you can just start convoking into one of my favorite cards, Venerated Loxodon, where just everything grows into a 2/2 or 2/3 in the case of Novice Inspector.
Yeah. And we're seeing too here, like, this is a huge impact, right? Like,
yeah.
one way to look at this is Zoe just added 11 power to the board out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And, you know, did it for very little commitment and still has, like, clues left around to kind of draw cards and sort of get out of this. And even if, you know, we end up flooding out a little bit, we have Giganta in our deck. And this is why these can be such hard matchups for these other opposing creature decks, because Zoe just puts in more power typically for less mana while drawing more cards.
Yeah. And even if Zoe does flood out, you still have things to do with that mana, as we talked before, right? You have Warden of the Inner Sky, you have all these random tokens that draw cards, discard cards. Like it's an aggressive deck that gives you other options, which is quite strong. And this is why Convoke is one of the best aggro decks in the format.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just turning sideways, that's it. It's like, oh, I have like a Sheffet Dunes that I can sack if I have some excess mana to deal some damage. I can play Den of the Bugbear, also be aggressive with some excess mana and deal some damage.
I love this play from Zoe. You saw her play Ornithopter and just convoke for 1. She could have convoked for more and maybe got a 5-drop, but she knows, like, hey, these 1-drop creatures, they're for attacking. I don't need to worry about drawing cards.
You can tell Zoe is just like, yeah, this is the time I need to be aggressive and close this game. My opponent's on the back foot. They're playing like 1 or 2 creatures a turn. I'm playing 3 or 4, thanks to things like Lethal Demolition. You can easily outrace in this sense.
Yeah, and you're seeing here too, Zoe has, you know, a Sheffet Dunes in the land base.
Yeah.
If she draws any land, and you're just going to see
See, and this is another reason I like Boros Convoke, because the games are relatively quick. Lunchtime exists.
Yep. Yeah, and, you know, very tight play there from both players. It was a good job here. We're going to have an interview here with Zoe in just a second after she's done sideboarding. She can talk to us about her Convoke deck, and we can ask her about the Thalia and everything as well. But, yeah, I mean, you know, like you were saying, this is a very fast deck that, you know, you get to, like, win your rounds. And that is, like, a real thing, right? Like, over these long tournaments, you're going to get tired, and getting some free win rounds are good. And you're not giving up a lot. You know, it's not like she's playing a deck that gets free wins. She's playing a really strong, consistent deck that can play these long games as well.
Yeah, as I was mentioning earlier, Boros Convoke, while it's really good at being aggressive and making all these different kinds of tokens and making all these different kind of threats, you still have stuff to do. Even if you like flood out, you can cash in some clue tokens to draw a card. You can cash in those blood tokens to exchange a card. Basically, you have, you know, Den of the Bugbear that gets in and creates a token which can help with your Convoke. Like, there are so many things Boros Convoke does passively that I don't think people quite realize, and it just encourages that super aggressive start that we saw from Zoe for the first early turns of those 2 games, even when she was on the draw in the second one.
Yeah, and, you know, James there had a really cool deck in Orzhov Humans, but we saw sort of like a classic deck building problem, right? You have a really cool deck. It seems to be powerful. You know, we're 2-0 at like this killer tournament with all the other pros going on. Obviously, there's some good stuff there, but are you a better version than Boros Convoke, right?
Yeah.
In this matchup, doesn't seem so. It looks like we might be better in some other matchups and some different strengths, and a thing to definitely keep in your back pocket as well. But you have to always be careful. Am I playing a deck that is actually just a worse version of another deck? I don't think that is the case here, but in this matchup, and these kind of matchups of Convoke teams continues to rise up, you might have to be a Convoker for a little bit before you get to back to being humans.
And there's nothing wrong with that. Convoke is just generally quite good. And something that you mentioned earlier, like standard Convoke is also a thing that is becoming a threat. We'll talk about standard Convoke a little later, because Zoe is now in the interviewers booth. So we're going to have a lovely chat about Boros Convoke and how great Thraben Inspector is.
Zoe, congratulations on being 3-0 in a timely manner. How are you feeling so far?
I'm feeling pretty good. A little shaky this morning because of the weather, but like we're doing it. We're 3-0.
Excellent. So let's talk about your Boros Convoke list. So I noticed in your list you decided to not run Thalia, Guardian of Thraben. Is there what was your thought process behind that?
I feel like Thalia is only really good into some matchups. I don't like playing it on turn 2 typically because it's not mana neutral into your Convoke creature. Like, it costs 2 mana for only 1 body. And I find it really valuable for doing your A plan of putting a 4/4 into play, that you really need your creatures to be mana neutral into that. So I just found that Thalia wasn't good enough.
And speaking of good enough, you seem to be playing 8 of the new novice inspector, 8 inspectors in total, 4 of the new novice one. How have you felt about that card in the deck so far?
I feel like it's really good. Like, Thraben Inspector was already one of the best cards in the deck. Not only does it contribute well to your game A plan of convoking and putting just game objects into play, but it helps you going into the late game. Just drawing a body that draws another card has been very powerful.
Yeah. So let's talk a bit more about Boros Convoke. So what was your thought process for registering Boros Convoke this weekend? Like, what metagame were you expecting leading into this event?
I would say that I thought Convoke was kind of poorly placed this weekend. I did really poorly with it when I registered it at the RC in Atlanta like a couple months ago. But trying other decks, I just couldn't find something that I was comfortable with. And so I was just like, you know what? I like this deck. I won with it before. Let's do it again. And it seems to be working out.
Nice. What were some of those other decks that you tried leading into this event? You know, what were some of the things that, you were exploring but just didn't quite hit for you?
I tried, Is It in Soul? Because I like the attacking. I just felt like it was doing the Convoke thing, but not nearly as strongly. Like, having access to Spell Pierce is not worth the trade-off. And then the other deck that I tried was just stock Rakdos mid-range. I just didn't feel like it was something that I can gain an advantage with over the field. But
sure.
Yep, that makes sense. So we talked about 8 inspectors and how the Murders of Karlov banner card has really helped Boros Convoke. Outside of Novice Inspector, what would you say is one of the best cards in Pioneer from Murders of Karlov mana?
Honestly, I have no idea. I've just been focusing on the inspectors. I think the mana leak, what's it called? No More Lies is a pretty big deal. It's making blue-white pretty popular this weekend from what I've seen. I'm kind of afraid of that deck. So we'll see how I do against it in the rest of the tournament. But yeah.
Hopefully you get to dodge it all weekend.
Yeah.
Or all of today. That would be good.
All right, before we have you go, Zoe, we have the standard event tomorrow. It's just you, me, and 1,000 of our closest friends. Let's talk about it. Are you going to be convoking again tomorrow? Are we going to see it?
Nearly the same deck tomorrow, just adapted.
We were going to talk about this, yeah.
Love it. We love to see it. We hope to see you crush with that again tomorrow. We're actually going to go watch your friend Mac Indris play right now in our backup feature match. But thank you so much, Zoe. Go have fun with your friends, and we'll hopefully be seeing you more later in the day.
Thanks.
And as I mentioned there, we do have Mac Indris as our backup feature match, someone who made our NRG championship in 2022 with Zoe, a good friend of hers, and someone who actually top-8'd the regional championship in Denver last weekend playing the 5-color Rhino deck.
Yeah. It looks like Mac Indris is on the Azorius control with Yorion as the companion. We talked about briefly how No More Lies is going to be really good. He is against Will Kowalskitz, who is on Amalia combo. So how do you measure that matchup? How would you measure the control combo matchup?
It's pretty good for control. Cards like Temporary Lockdown are a beating. No More Lies, exiling is a problem. You can win as Amalia, but it's pretty tough. We are going to jump down to live game 2 when that happens here in a second. So get ready for that chat. It's going to be exciting. But I think it's going to be a position where the Amalia player needs to apply pressure and force the Temporary Lockdown stuff to come at the wrong time. But part of the benefit of Yorion actually is that you can flicker things like that temporary lockdown there. And it looks like we maybe have a little bit of stuff going on. We're going to fix that in a second for you.
Yeah.
But, it's interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think what we see from Mac here is Mac is someone who's also played 4-color Yorion a lot. We saw a lot of Mac doing that when he won for the 2020 Showdown. He is really good at playing these high resource-intensive, decision-intensive decks. Like definitely someone who can play stuff like 5-color Rhinos. I was a little shocked to see him playing it personally, and it was really a sign that that deck might be good. Mac is really believing in it and willing to give up sort of these sort of things that I would say are kind of in his skill set, in his like real strengths. If I were to describe a player.
For sure. So it looks like Mac Andres is up a game in this match in the Azorius Control Mirror, and we'll see how things play out. And it looks like Ben Bates is on the Kahira build, if I can get past the glare.
Yeah, looking up here on Melee is the Kahira deck, and that's going to offer a couple things like, some players play Bramaz and stuff like that in the sideboard in the past, maybe gain edge in the mirror. It looks like we're just playing Regal Caracol, but it really means is Ben's going to have quicker access and consistent access to cards, but have less fight in the mirror. Because one thing that happens with these Yorion decks is you actually get like answer density. And so Mac's going to just have more answers than Ben will over the course of the game.
Yeah. It looks like Ben Bates is incorporating a new card from Murders of Carlo Banner in Deduce. How has that shaped up control decks in Pioneer, Mason?
I think it's been a really good ad. It's kind of like a modern day version of Think Twice, right? You draw a card now and then you pop the clue later, get the thing, but also giving you artifact synergies. We haven't seen a ton of the artifact synergy stuff pop up yet. I think it's just nice. Like, these control decks want to be using their mana when they're holding up counter magic. And so just kind of, doing that classic Think Twice angle of, okay, I'll draw a card now. I held up my counter spells more later, draw a card again.
Yep. So there is a lot of tapping, landing, and saying land go here. We will try and get past through as much of this glare as possible as well.
Yeah. Oh, goodness gracious. Ben Bates with the smoked double sleeves. What a faux pas.
I mean, I can't say much. I use smoked double sleeves as well.
Oh my gosh. I'm in the booth of a monster. Get me out.
It looks like we have a Shock Typhoon. Going to make a big Shock token and looking to chip away at some damage, because this is how many control mirrors tend to play out in the early stages.
Yep, and you're noticing Mac waiting to do this until we have 3 mana. That way we are bigger than Restless Anchorage, the new creature land from Lost Caverns of Ixalan. If we made this a 2/2, sure, we use our mana a little bit sooner, draw a card sooner, but Ben just gets to activate the land and eat it.
It looks like we just saw no more lies, just easily dealing with that Wandering Emperor just for the cheap value of 2 mana.
Yeah, and we see Ben looked to have been trying to fight, potentially set something up, but maybe just didn't have the spell that he wanted to fight over it there. But yeah.
This Memory Deluge resolving is going to be pretty big for Mac as well.
Yeah, and you see Mac very quickly, someone who plays these kind of decks a lot and is, very used to the heavy decisions, but also knows what he kind of wants in this spot.
It's worrying when a control player just quickly plays their spells.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the most terrifying things of playing against a control player. If they know what they're doing and then they know their lines without a beat, it's like, okay, I'm in danger. Yeah. Things are bad.
I'm in danger.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And here comes that Restless Anchorage you were talking about, Mason. Just going to start chipping in for a few points of damage here.
Yeah. And
it looks like that Ganjo, Seat of the Empire, dealt with it, but Mac does get a map token out of the trade, which isn't a terrible trade. And Mac still has a bunch of lands. He has a Hall of the Storm Giants and a bunch of other things to do.
Yeah, and luckily for Mac, Ben's probably not going to use the Wandering Emperor immediately because we want to try and preserve it. But if Mac wants to try and pressure with something like Hall of the Storm Giants, we are going to be tapping out. So if Ben has an answer, it could be backbreaking. And if Ben just has a better follow-up thread, that could also be very punishing.
Yeah. It looks like a Chrome Host Seed Shark. I want to say Glare is not my friend.
Yeah.
What's better than one shark? Playing two sharks.
Yeah. Chrome Seed Shark 2, sort of the card Monster Mentor's, partner tells you not to worry about, actually makes a lot of real threats,
Yes.
And we've seen this a lot. Yeah, so we actually see Max sort of spending some mana to, answer this here and make a big incubate token. Just gives you actual threats that end the game and let you commit the mana when you want in these blue-white control decks.
I do like how most Azorius control decks is essentially shark typal.
Yeah.
With some spells.
It is nice that sharks have become a real creature type in Magic, because we had some cards that didn't really do much, and now they've just been like, yeah, you know what? Sharks are, like you said, they're the control finishers these days. Enough of these boring Sphinx cards. They're out. Sharks are in.
Rip Sphinx's Revelation.
Yeah. Gone at just the right time.
So we'll see what Macendris does here. I see a couple of Dovin Vetoes. I see a Field of Ruin, which is really good against opposing manlands. We do have a Fairy Hero of Dominaria, which I imagine Ben Bates is going to fight pretty hard to counter. And finding the time to counter that, like, Control Bearers is all about patience, right? It's like, when do you play these threats?
Yeah, and that's like we saw in the early game, the players are kind of jockeying for position. And now, Ben kind of got to sit this Wandering Emperor in play thanks to going for the Deluge, and the whole game has been about it since then.
And here we go. An easy Dovin's Veto from Ben Bates, because Teferi is a bit of a mirror breaker, let's be honest. It just accrues so much value, and being able to untap lands to use your counter spells is just so backbreaking.
Yeah, and we see two here, right? Like, this is why being the one who gets the first threat on the board matters so much, or sticking, I should say, the last one. Because, Ben wasn't first. The shark came on the board from earlier, but wanting to tap out and use the Deluge, which made a lot of sense at the time, so to put us in a really bad position against Ben.
Yep, so we'll see what Mac is going to do here. He's going to crack that map token. Can't see what the card is, which is frustrating. But
it's an
like
Omen of the Sea.
Okay, cool. You're much better at this than I am.
My brain is very normal when it comes to cardboard cards, and we'll simply not talk about it.
So here comes Teferi number 2. See if this one sticks around. This also gets Dovin Vetoed.
Yeah, and this is, Mac has a bunch of Dovin Vetoes too, right? So one thing that's happening is Ben, gets 60-card deck, gets a slight edge when it comes to that sort of thing, because we haven't hit any of the cards like Omen just yet that allow Mac to actually get better card selection. But because Ben, has the vetoes, we just aren't getting our answers, our threats down the board, and you get to do that with 60 cards a little bit better than 80 cards does early on. Later game ends up favoring Mac, though. Yeah,
absolutely. So we have an Omen of the Sea. Looks like we have a Get Lost, which is a card that kind of kickstarted Azorius Control in Pioneer in a meaningful way, right? It came in Lost Canvas at Ixalan. The general consensus that control players were like wanting a cheap, effective removal spell, and they got it with this Get Lost.
Yeah, Get Lost is a great way to just kind of like pick battles over basically everything. And yeah, the map tokens end up being a problem some percentage of the time, but often it's not a huge deal.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we see a counterfight actually happen there, a little bit off screen quickly from these players. And you're seeing Mac being like, listen, maybe there's like a 1% chance I win or whatever, but I need to like pick up the cards because we have got to play game number 3 if I'm going to actually win.
Yeah. It's like, one part that we don't talk about control, sure, like playing really quickly is one thing. The other thing is just acknowledging when you're going to lose and how valuable that time you can get for the game 3. So looking to the sideboard, what do you like sideboarding in against an Azorius control mirror as the Yorion player?
Yeah, so as a year-round player, we saw those Chrome Host Sea Sharks. Those are great. You just want more threats, and ones that specifically dodge Dovin's Veto is a big one. Mystical Dispute's a great card that we want as well. Narset Reversal, we talked about it earlier against Lotus Field in the day and how you can, like, pop your own spell. It's a great way to sort of hide your spell once again from this counter magic, and one of the few ways to get around Dovin's Veto. You know, you go to counter my, my counter spell or whatever, or my Memory Deluge, and I pop it back to my hand and put a counter on the stack. That's a great way to kind of get around that. Narset Parter Veils can come up a fair amount-ish. It isn't, backbreaking, but with the Yorion deck, you have 80 cards, so sometimes you just have some ones in your main deck that aren't super good, and you want to just make the swap.
Sure. And then we'll go to Ben Bates's list. As the Kahira player, what would you like to bring in against this mirror, a mirror that could go on for quite a while?
Yeah, it's actually starting. Let's head on down to the future match area. I don't want to miss anything. I'll just say second verse same as the first day. They have a lot of the same cards, a lot of the same stuff that matters.
Sure. It looks like Ben Bates just kicked off a Hallowed Moonlight, I want to say.
Yeah, that's a good sign that Ben is maybe a little light on lands. Mac might have been a little restricted on colors too, because typically, you hold the weight to get those things off stuff. Like when they go to activate the Reckless Anchorage, it might also just be Mac playing for time and just being like, "Hey, I know this is going to die at some point. I don't want to draw any lands. Let's just try this out now.
Yeah, let's just get this done quick." Yeah. I can respect that.
Yeah, we all know what's going to happen. I'm just going to do it now. Get it out of the way.
Yeah. Okay, so it looks like Ben has drawing into lands, which is, what you want as a control player. And there's just a lot of land goes, which obviously tends to happen in these matchups.
Yeah, and one thing that's kind of nice about the land go situation is typically when both players seem to know what's up, like Mac and Ben do here, they happens pretty quickly because both players are like, I just don't want to play a card. So they just end up playing a land and passing. And only when they have, a lot of threats and not a lot of answers does it end up changing. As we see Ben there by popping the clue, actually had to move to discard.
Yes.
Yeah. And kind of a small misstep there that probably won't be the end of the world there for Ben by popping that clue and doing that, but was something that, you have to be aware of. Oh,
no more lies. Back once again.
Yeah, and that hit a Memory Deluge. So the fact of the Exile really coming up there. So now, in the late game, Ben's not going to get back that 7-mana version of the card in order to sort of sink some mana in. And that is something that really matters in these control mirrors.
Looks like Ben is going to kick things off with the Wandering Emperor. And here comes the counter wall once again. This Dovin Vetoes is just such a good mirror breaker because just having that uncounterable clause is just so big in these matchups.
It's huge. And it's really important in lots of other matchups too, right? Like against Lotus Field, just being an uncounterable thing comes up, as a fair amount if they try to use cards like Mystical Dispute, basically forcing them to switch to different answers. So it's a format impactful card. And
speaking of effective counter spells, we've got a Mystical Dispute that's going to take this Chrome Host Sea Shark, which is a fantastic tag.
Yeah. I'm going to, puff my chest a little. I see Mac here is playing Urtai Scorn. I know that's a card that Jessie Robkin played because I convinced her to. I think it's great in these Orzhov mirrors. Like we saw Absorb earlier in the day. It's just a cheaper counterspell most of the time.
And there we go. Thalia Scorn is going to take down this Teferi hero Dominaria. But Ben is thinking if he wants to fight for it.
Yeah, this might be a sign to me that Ben is. Just maybe doesn't have a card that actually answers it and is afraid of Mac doing something like Mystical Dispute and wants to hold up, Dovin's Veto for a different card.
We'll try again. I think this one's going to stick though. Not for long, but it's going to stick.
Yeah.
And this is why Get Lost is just so good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, basically being a counter in a lot of ways, right? Mac just said, hey, counter that card, you draw a card. Because the map tokens don't come up a ton typically in this matchup.
Yeah.
And so lets him save the Dovin's Vetoes for fighting over his own cards. I've got to say, I love that Twitch chat is obsessed that Ben looks like Ryan Reynolds. It kind of does. Once you say it, you can't unsee it. But
yeah.
I've got my eye on you, Twitch chat. I'm watching always. I just keep seeing Ryan Reynolds popping up, and
For Ryan.
Yeah. Off the set of Deadpool 3, decided to come on down, play some Magic.
Playing a control mirror.
Yeah. See, I don't think Ryan Reynolds would play control, though. That's the thing. I feel like he'd be like...
doesn't strike me as a control gamer.
Yeah, something a little cheekier, like kind of an Amalia player. Like you tap out and he gives you that devilish grin as he puts in something in. And speaking of which, the Eternal Wanderer coming down here.
Yeah. And it's going to get losted.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone gets a map token.
Yeah.
And this is quite common for control mirrors. It's just like, yep, I play a threat, I remove the threat, rinse and repeat until someone gains an advantage because someone just doesn't have the resources or the counter magic anymore. Mm-hmm. It just feels like there's a lot of back and forth, button into heads, which is kind of common for control mirrors.
Yeah. Yeah, really, it's a lot of just back and forth, like slamming answers at each other. And then eventually someone takes over.
Yeah, I feel that way whenever I play Dan Dan.
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually a great comparison for it.
I have said to people, if you want to get good at playing like control and just thinking about Magic, I think like playing Dan Dan is a really good place to start. It's mentally taxing because you have to remember cards and like where they are. But I think long term, it just helps you get better at just these sort of like control slugfests where you just back and forth all the time.
Agreed.
As you can tell, I'm a big Dan Dan gamer.
Yeah. And yeah, it's fun. And it looks like Max Grumho Seed Shark did stick there, so probably a good sign for him that, Ben doesn't have any answer to it, because that would have been a good time to go for it.
Yes. Looks like we're going to float some mana. Oh, we're going to Memory Deluge. It looks like... Be interested to see what's in Ben's hand, because Mac is starting to stick a lot of these massive threats. So this Chromehouse Sea Shark's down. We have a Memory Deluge. Oh, no, we just got no more lies. Never mind.
Yeah, but luckily, with the Chrome Host being on the board, we do get that 4/4 Incubate token, which means we now have 2 things that pressure this Teferi. So,
yeah. Ben Bates cycles this Hallowed Moonlight once again just to draw a fresh card.
Yeah, and if you're Mac, I don't see any creature lands at the moment, so I think you have the green light to force the game to be about this Teferi. Only really the Wandering Emperor to worry about.
And the Wandering Emperor is down. And there's another one. And there's a No More Lies.
And you're seeing in this game, right, just how big No More Lies was compared to Make Disappear, right?
Yeah.
Like, both players have multiple times had 2 mana up and just got a No More Lies and basically have to, allow this to happen. Well, Ben is maybe wanting to fight over a little bit.
Dovin's vetoing, which is a pretty convincing answer to No More Lies.
Yeah, and I like that from Ben. It feels like he's falling really far behind, and it can be tempting to kind of hold your Dovin's veto for, maybe fighting over some high impact card for Mac. But if you just leave Mac with the Chrome Host, it's probably going to be more impactful than most things at this point in the game, because you're going to have some other fight over the course of the game.
Yeah. These Incubate tokens are starting to make an impression. We'll say I do appreciate Mac's foiling out of this deck. You can tell Mac really loves blue-white control if they're going to, based on the land base alone, it's just a lot of foiling out. I believe the Wandering Emperor we saw was one of the Japanese alt arts.
Yeah, the exclusive ones that are very hard to find.
Yes.
Mac, he likes these kind of decks, and he likes a little bling.
Who doesn't?
Yeah.
I mean, I like a little bling. Okay, looks like Ben is going to pop off a big shark because what happened there? Just trying to.
So Ben made
oh,
a big
it got
start
marched.
Yes, got March of Otherworldly lighted there with the draw on the stack. So
yeah,
nothing you could really do with it anyways with only a mana up.
Just wasn't familiar with that variant of March.
Mm-hmm. It's a good one.
It is a good one. It's kind of surprising that no one's drawn any manlands yet.
Yeah, but they just kind of got answered early on, right? Like we kind of saw this Field of Ruins when we were in the developing stage, and we're talking about how we're kind of rushing through it. And because there hasn't been, you know, a bunch of like Teferi sticking around or deluges happening thanks to No More Lies, it's really made the game a lot different.
And we now have a Farewell.
Yeah, and I
think it's going to exile the graveyard as well.
Yeah, I think it is. I think Mac was the one that had the deluge in the graveyard. Obviously, if Ben's the one with the deluge, then that won't be happening. But
oh, it's an asset reversal.
Yeah, and so you know, Mac is going to lose the cancel though, and Arset Reversal is going to put a copy of Farewell on the stack, and it is going to resolve.
Ugh. That is a hell of a play from Ben Bates there.
Yeah. Narset Reversal should be in the graveyard because it resolves putting the Farewell on the stack. Kind of a weird interaction, but does happen that way.
Yeah. That's a good way to follow up. Just play your big companion.
And we talked earlier, right, about how like we have Omen of the Sea in this matchup, and we have like Temporary Lockdown, which is really good against the aggro decks. But in this matchup too, besides just having more answers in your deck by having more cards, you just have the bigger companion. You know, if Ben does the exact same play, it's a 3-2. Just doesn't really matter as much.
Now Ben Bates gets to resolve his own Memory Deluge, but is going to be, was going to face down a Urium, but now it got lost somehow. Just went missing somewhere.
Well, up in the skies where Yorion is, it's very confusing. You don't have the same sort of ground landmarks, you know? Take a left at the Nimbus, just doesn't hit the same like it does with the McDonald's, you know?
Yeah. And here comes a Shock Typhoon and a big old 7/7 flying threat, which if Ben doesn't have an answer for, it's going to be pretty hard for Ben to get back in this game. But it seems like Ben just has 1,000 copies of Wandering Emperor. I think this is the third one I've seen so far. And it's always followed up with the Get Lost.
Yeah, and you know, it's funny, right? Ben has less Emperors than Mac does. Because Mac has 80 cards, he gets to play 4 Teferi, 4 Emperor. Ben just has to play 3 and 3. But, you know, Mac hasn't drawn any of the cards or done any of the stuff that allows him to take advantage of having those more answers because we've just been fighting over Memory Deluges the whole game.
Yes. Now Mac finally gets to play another copy of Wandering Emperor, which has managed to stick around, at least for a turn. We do have a Castle Ardenvale, which is not quite a land, but it is something to do with that excess mana and just provide some ball presence.
Yeah, that one's going to do a good job of, you know, forcing the action, not this turn, but in like 5 turns.
Yeah. Now we have another Shark Typhoon. We're just trading sharks.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting to sort of see.
Oh, here's a Hall of the Storm Giants. That's going to be pretty good.
Yeah, that's a creature land that wins very quickly.
And there's a Restless Anchorage, which is also a pretty good creature land.
Yeah, those are if you're going to draw a land as Mac Indris, those are the lands you want to be drawing. Although, unfortunately, Mac shocked in the Hallowed Fountain for the turn to fight over Ben, if he went for any spells in response there, which makes sense and you can do in these kind of matchups, isn't as punishing as it might be in other matchups.
Yeah.
Oh, I love this from Mac.
Yeah.
X is all of it.
Everything's a shark.
Yeah. Odawara there from Ben as well, going to answer that shark, meaning, Mac, I think, is just on. Oh, picked up Teferi from the Shark Typhoon cycle. I was going to say all lands in hand, but.
Yeah. But Ben does have a shark in play, which just might be enough at this rate.
Yeah, I mean, if Ben doesn't have an answer to this Teferi, that could be something to pull it out. But it looks like Ben's looking for different stuff because he binned the Mystical Dispute. So he doesn't look for the traditional counters right now. Interesting. Looks like Mac played a Field of Ruin for turn.
But Ben does not have any manlands. He has the Castle Ardenvale, which is a fine target. There is only a one of in Ben Bates' deck.
Yeah, I think what's happening is Mac might be trying to Field of Ruin to shuffle Ben's deck so that the Shark Typhoon can't come off the top.
That is a pretty heads-up play. And it's those fine lines and nuances and control mirrors that can sometimes just win you the game.
It really is. Field of Ruin is also one of the ones you have to shuffle your deck to. Ben can't just decline. He would love, given the option, he would love to just basically like, nah, I'll lose the land, give me the shark. But such is life.
It's a forced search. Been bit by that before, when playing against like a mill deck and they Arco trap you and then you're sad. So. There's lots going on here. It looks like we are going to play this Kahira. Because sometimes you just need to close these games out and just have a board presence. Now it's time to get aggressive. But also, Mac will have this Hall of the Storm Giants now, which is just going to be a huge threat because of the Ward. And Ward is just, like, really good in these sort of matchups.
Yeah, and Ben is going to need to find something like a Field of Ruin if we're going to easily answer that Hall of the Storm Giants.
Yeah, Ben does run 3 in his list. I don't think we've seen one yet.
No, it's a drawing life, but does also have these sharks that are basically going to force Mac to have an answer now because we're looking at lethal.
Especially with this Restless Anchorage coming in tapped as well.
And
there we go. That was a hell of a back and forth game 3, but welcome to Control Mirrors. It tends to snowball in that way. It's very... So it kind of begins where, it's very play a land, pass the turn. You do that for like 6 or 7 turns, and then this snowball of I play a threat. No, I'm going to counter this threat. No, I'm going to counter me trying to play this threat. And then if you play a threat, it gets removed. And it's just very sort of back and forth, which is really fun to see when you have 2 very experienced control players that know what they're doing. I think that's a really fun way to watch Magic.
Yeah, it was a fun match. Like we didn't have much going on in the early game. We kind of postured and we set up for a bunch of haymakers back and forth. And both players didn't get to resolve a lot of their memory delusions earlier and had a lot of tough, picking their battles. Do they really want to fight this? Typically you don't. But it was really cool. It was really exciting to watch. It made me excited to play more Magic. And so speaking of more Magic, Emma, let's talk about some of our upcoming events because we are going around the country this year, traveling all over to bring you all Magic. First up is Minneapolis. We have a 10K Modern Showdown on Saturday. Showdowns are the things that if you win them, you're going to go to our Players Championship at the end of the year for a 24-person invitational only $30,000 prize pool. That's also a PTQ. The winner goes straight to the Pro Tour. So you're going to want to go and play in that event if you especially love Modern. And then Sunday, hello, Legacy lovers. We love you. We have a 5K trial there as well. So if you're someone who enjoys Legacy, you're going to want to fly out to that event as well. We do our best to support Legacy here on the NRG series. But that's not all we're going to this year when it comes to the Appalachians. We are going to Indianapolis as well. We have another Modern 10K Showdown May 11th and 12th with a team showdown on Sunday. So you're going to notice this is a double weekend, Emma. When we talk about our vernacular, showdowns mean you go to the championship, you go to the PTQ. If you win Saturday or you and your friends win Sunday on Standard Modern Pioneer, all three of you are going to go to our showdown. That gives you a little testing team locked up there. It's very exciting to see those sort of team events. I personally can't wait to cover and watch these matches of Magic.
Yeah, and personally for me, Team Magic is the best way to play Magic. I don't know if you feel similar, Mason.
It's a very fun time to go out there and play with your friends and have fun sort of, in the city, make a weekend of it. And, you all get to, rise and fall together. It's a great time.
Absolutely.
But that's going to do it for this round. We're going to take a quick break. We just hit time around a couple minutes ago as those players were finishing up. Feature matches on a different clock. So it's going to be a couple more minutes before the next round starts. So go get some water. We'll be right back. Follow the channel. Don't miss any of the action.